The biggest single thing you can do to ensure your MMO is successful is take your time, do it right. You only have one chance to launch. You got to make sure that you have full range of features for a full range of people. You have to make sure that you appeal to hardcore, to more casual players, lots of things to do. So I like to think of it more as we're making a world that we want people to live in. Yes, there's a game there, but as you saw today, there's a lot of games in the game. So we want to make sure there's just a ton of stuff for you to do. So if you don't feel like leveling or you don't feel like PvPing, there's something for you to do. We started out knowing that two groups of people were going to play this game. Like there's going to be MMO players from, all the old school MMOs from 1997 on, and now there's a huge population of Elder Scrolls fans that really don't know a whole lot about MMOs. They might have dabbled in some, but they're certainly not experts. So we had to make sure that the game appeals to both of them. And the way we did that is we kind of figured out what the commonalities were between the two and really concentrated on making sure that we hit those. And some of the commonalities are not necessarily things people want, but what they don't want. So for example, I think people are getting pretty tired of MMO combat now in the MMO world, but the Elder Scrolls players kind of like their combat. So there was a, hey, we make our combat more like Elder Scrolls and less like MMOs.
Our core game has the same, you equip a weapon and you left click and right click to attack or block respectively, but in Skyrim when you're playing, you have all these spells that you can choose from and you switch between them by pausing the game, and you activate and you cycle between them and use them strategically. Of course you can't pause the game in an MMO, so what we did was provide you with the sort of the hot bar where you could create a shortcut of all your favorite abilities and just fire them off in the middle of combat. And I think that's something that was necessitated by what we do in MMOs, but actually I really enjoy having access to multiple different spells in addition to what my weapon can already do that can be fired on demand. I really like what it does to our gameplay.
We're making an Elder Scrolls game. We're not making Skyrim 2. So I think the Skyrim guys had that same problem when they went from Oblivion to Skyrim. It's like, your last thing was Oblivion. How could you possibly top that? Because Oblivion was an awesome game. So we're not trying to top Skyrim. Like, Skyrim's a fantastic game. Like, if you want to play Skyrim, go play Skyrim. Like, we're doing something a little bit different. Yes, it's online, but it's right, it feels like an Elder Scrolls game. You get in, it looks like an Elder Scrolls game. It feels like an Elder Scrolls game. We have many systems that come from there. It should feel comfortable to people who play Elder Scrolls games, but it's its own game on its own right.
There's tight timing windows for blocks or for dodging. In a lot of ways, that's a tech limitation. Right? Internet speeds are a lot faster now, and we can reliably have lower latencies. Whereas, and with some of the older MMOs, with some of the classics, there was assumptions like, well, it might be 1 second before you hear back a message, and now if you can imagine playing a sort of a modern shooter in 1,000 milliseconds of ping, like you just turn it off, there would be no point. So I think that's part of it, allowing for more reactivity. As far as MMOs gaining more, I guess AI and complex behaviors out of monsters, I think that is actually more of a philosophical thing. And this is just me speculating, but definitely, with our game in particular, a philosophy was we want this to feel like a modern RPG, which means not a bunch of numbers, not crazy calculated DPS, and not a ton of UI telling you how to play the game.
Being effective in battle can be communicated in better ways and ways that immerse you more in the world than having numbers float over your head. Like, you can see it from the hit reactions, you can see from the animation that you use when you do one of the big, when you do a power attack, you see yourself winding up. When you see that you're doing a lot of damage. You don't need to see plus 50 over the guy's head. And I think that it boils down to the fact that, numbers are not Elder Scrolls. And we're really, I said this in the very beginning this morning, we're making an RPG. Like, yes, it's an MMO. Certainly there's lots of players in it, but we want a solid RPG experience. And the two sometimes are mutually incompatible, and that's one of the places.
It is its own challenge, but in a lot of ways it's better. We ended up designing things, especially for encounters, as kind of building blocks. We know there's this certain set of mechanics that every player can do, regardless of what weapon or class or skills they've selected. Right? We know they can block, we know they can do light and heavy attacks, we know they can roll dodge, and there's a few other mechanics like that get introduced as you go through the levels. And when we start producing the monsters, we think about how they'll play off of those mechanics. At first it's very simple. Great, this guy's going to cast a spell. I'll bash it. But then, as you go further and further advance, you start to do things like, okay, well, this is a big monster, and he's going to do a big charge attack on you, and you can't block that. And now you got to deal with that in some other way. And what we found is because we built these things all sort of oriented around these core mechanics, that as we scale up to larger encounters, things start to just occur naturally, but all within a system that players have learned and make sense of. It's just more of it occurring. But it's really quite dynamic and interesting because two things happening simultaneously that you have to cope with is actually a pretty interesting challenge. Like, you have to figure out the timings of each of them.
Now, I think if, like I said, we want to support all different kinds of gameplay. If a player wants to get in and play the game solo, like they did the other Elder Scrolls game, and kind of ignore the other players going around, that's fine. In fact, that gameplay is well supported in most other MMOs. You have an auction house, so you can buy stuff, that other players do, and that's how you interact with them. And if that's the extent of the interactivity that you want and you have fun, hey, that's great. What we did with the classes is we made them so that I really strongly feel when you start to play a game, you have kind of a role in your mind that you want to do. Oh, I like the way that guy looks. I want to be a guy in armor. I want to be, a healer, that kind of thing. Just basic decisions. Having 4 classes gives you the ability to at least start out on a path. So that I pick this guy, I'm generally going to be going this way. Yes, I can, if I pick, the sorcerer, I can pull out a 2-handed sword and plate mail, and I can be effective. That's fine. Just by the fact that I want to be a sorcerer because I want to cast elemental magic. Yes, I cast elemental magic. It doesn't mean I can't do any of the other things, and that's where it comes. That's where the system really comes alive.
When we were playing with the initial prototypes of the first-person system a while back, pretty much everyone was saying, actually, the world feels more immersive. I'm really excited, and in a lot of places, if you played today, you noticed you were picking off things off of shelves and and seeing books in the corner. And when you're actually at eye level and your camera at eye level, a lot of times you notice that better than when you're slightly angled. And so we found that people were like, oh, well, look, there's actually a book over there and a crate over there, and they would spend more time, and that really contributed to feeling even more Elder Scrolls, because a lot of those things have always been in there, but because your perspective, sometimes could be more like a regular MMO, you may not have noticed them, and some people started noticing it, and it was pretty cool.
We always knew it was something that players were going to want. We couldn't actually do it, and still were in process of doing it, mostly because, not to get too technical here, but in first person in a single player game, all the effects, the graphical effects that play on your hands and on your weapons are tuned for, I'm staring at them and they're this far away from me. In a multiplayer game, that same effect has to work this far away from the camera when you're looking at it, and from 100 meters away when another player is looking at you. So you really need a system that scales the effects so that you're not staring at a cloud of green, or purple or whatever all the time when you're in first-person mode. But also it's enough so that when people are coming at you, they can see what it is what effect is playing and so forth. So it's whenever you add other players seeing things from a different distance from where you're seeing it, a lot of systems have to be designed. So we needed to make sure we had the third-person one working first, not just because that was your camera, but that was how everyone else sees you in the world. And we do that, and then we can then refine that, so when you go into first person, you get kind of miniature versions of those, so it's not so overwhelming to you. Then there's animations, and it's a whole tech pipeline. But we've known for a long time we were going to do it, but people were already requesting it, even before we made the decision. But we've known for a while now.
Well, because the modes are not exclusive, you don't choose at the beginning of the game, I only ever want to play first person, you can switch out. More or less what we've been experiencing is that when you get into the PvP mode, where the overall situational awareness is, most people go ahead and zoom out and play that way. But it is an option that is certainly immersive in a way that the zoomed out view can't be when you do go into that. And the answer to the question as far as the PvE goes is we were very careful to build our mechanics such that they would work universally, I would say, and when we were making the first person component of it happen, every step of the way it was, well, let's make sure this works as well with the mechanics, because there are these building blocks that we know. It's like, all right, well, what will the experience of chasing down a monster to bash them or to block a heavy attack be like, and how will you know you're getting attacked from the side, and sorts of things that you would lose in the third person, and making sure that they are supported in the first person. And we could certainly do it quick and just slap some hands up there and be like, yeah, we have first person mode, but that's really not the philosophy we have with regard to it. It's, let's make sure this is a fully realized game that people can experience, and then because you'll have both options, if you find that when you do in dungeons or PvP you really want to just play in a more zoomed out view, you can, then that works for us. But if you do want to experience the whole game in first person, then it's there for you, and we did our absolute best to make sure that also was an Elder Scrolls game.
I think the reaction that we had when we announced the game, which was mixed, was more like, we have heard game developers say things about games for a long time, and then we got into the games and we didn't see what they were talking about. That was a lot of the mixed reaction that we got, was headed that direction. It wasn't necessarily about Elder Scrolls. There was some of that, but mostly it was like, yeah, we've heard of action combat system, we've heard all that. We get into the game and it's the same old thing. So that's really why we have days like today where we don't talk much. You guys just get in and play. And then you guys tell everyone else that, hey, it exists, it really is what they say it is, or it's not, whatever your opinion is. But, basically, we are done explaining things. We want people to get in and play. And that's what's starting right now with days like this. Next week you can play it on the floor of PAX East, so anyone can walk in and play it. We're not going to sit them down and give them a presentation. They're just going to sit down and play it. And then they can see it for themselves, and then they can talk about it.